Chapter 1. The Truth About Lies. What if the most dangerous liar isn't the one who stutters and looks away, the one with sweaty palms, the one who can't meet your eyes, the one whose voice trembles when they speak? What if the person who poses the greatest threat to your perception of reality is the one who looks you directly in the eye? The one who seems completely confident, the one who speaks with unwavering calm, the one who everyone trusts without question. This isn't just a theory. This is what psychologists who study deception have discovered after decades of research. The signals we've been taught to look for, the nervous tics, the wandering eyes, the shaky voice, are exactly what skilled liars have learned to control. They've studied the same myths we have. They know what we're looking for, and they've built impenetrable walls around those obvious tells. But here's what they can't control. Behind every lie, there's a war happening inside the human brain, a war between what really happened and what the liar needs you to believe. And in that war, there are casualties, small leaks, tiny fractures in the performance that most people never notice. Psychologists call this the truth default. We are hardwired to believe. Our brains prefer harmony over suspicion, trust over investigation. It's an evolutionary shortcut that allows society to function. Imagine if you had to verify every statement made to you, every good morning, every I'm fine, every I'll have the report to you by Friday. You'd never accomplish anything. But this same survival mechanism is what makes us vulnerable. Tonight, I'm going to show you exactly how to see through it. Not by becoming suspicious of everyone around you, not by turning every conversation into an interrogation, but by understanding the 10 psychological fractures that appear in every lie. Fractures in the voice, fractures in the face, fractures in the story itself. And once you see them, you will listen to people the same way again. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation where everything sounded fine? The words were right, the tone was calm, the explanation made perfect sense, but something felt slightly off. You couldn't explain it, you couldn't point to any one thing, but there was a nagging sensation in the back of your mind that the story wasn't quite landing. That feeling isn't just intuition. It's your brain detecting a signal you missed consciously. A micropause before an answer, a flicker of tension across a face, a detail that was just a little too precise. Your unconscious mind caught it, but without the framework to understand what you were seeing, the signal faded into the background noise of the conversation. By the time you finish this deep dive, those signals will be impossible to ignore. Let's start with the most subtle one, the one that investigators use to crack open cases that have gone cold, the one hidden in something so simple, so seemingly insignificant that almost everyone misses it completely. The signal hidden in silence. Chapter 2. The Detective Who Noticed Nothing. To understand how these subtle signals appear in real life, we need to step inside a room where the stakes couldn't be higher, an interrogation room. A detective once described a case that haunted him, not because it was violent, not because it was complex, but because it was so perfectly ordinary. A suspect sat across from him, accused of a crime that would be difficult to prove without a confession. The evidence was circumstantial. The case would hinge on what happened in that room. The suspect walked in calm. He sat down with steady posture. His voice was measured, his answers clear. He maintained eye contact without hesitation, without challenge, without any of the behaviors people associate with guilt. If you had watched a recording of that interview, you would have seen nothing unusual. The suspect answered every question. He provided an alibi. He explained his whereabouts with clarity and precision. He even seemed eager to cooperate. To anyone watching from the outside, he was convincing. But the detective noticed something that most people would have completely ignored. Every time a question was asked, there was a pause. Not a long pause, not the kind of silence that fills a room with tension, just a fraction of a second longer than what the question naturally required, a microbeat of hesitation before the words began to flow. The suspect's answers were perfect once they started, but that tiny gap before each response, that was the crack. The detective didn't confront him about it. He didn't say, "I notice you're pausing before you answer." Instead, he let the conversation continue, watching the pattern repeat. Question, pause, perfect answer. Question, pause, perfect answer. By the end of the interrogation, the suspect had given a full statement. It was detailed, it was consistent, it was entirely fabricated. And that tiny delay, that fraction of a second, was the only warning. This brings us to the first signal psychologists look for when someone may not be telling the truth, and it's the most fundamental fracture in the architecture of deception. Chapter 3. Signal 1. The delay before answering. Think back to the last time you asked someone a simple question. Nothing complicated, nothing accusatory, just a straightforward request for information. Did you finish the report? Where were you last night? Did you speak to them? Now ask yourself, was there a pause before they answered? Not a dramatic silence, not a moment where they stared into space struggling to find words, just a brief hesitation, a moment where the air between you seemed to hold its breath before the answer arrived. Most people ignore that moment. They fill it in mentally, convincing themselves that the person was just thinking, just processing, just choosing the right words. And sometimes that's exactly what's happening. But in the study of human behavior, that tiny pause can reveal something far deeper. Here's why. When a person tells the truth, the brain performs a remarkably simple operation. It retrieves a memory. That's it. The experience already exists, encoded in neural pathways, stored away like a file on a hard drive. The brain doesn't need to invent anything. It doesn't need to construct. It simply accesses what's already there and reports it. This process is fast, effortless, automatic. But when a person lies, everything changes. The brain must now perform several complex operations simultaneously, all within the span of a few seconds. First, it must suppress the real memory. The truth wants to come out. It's the path of least resistance for the brain. Suppressing it requires active, conscious effort. Second, it must construct an alternative reality, a story that never happened, populated with details that never existed, unfolding in a timeline that was never experienced. Third, it must monitor your reaction. Are you buying it? Did your eyebrow twitch? Do you look skeptical? The liar's brain is constantly scanning your face for signs of disbelief, adjusting the story in real time based on your micro-reactions. Fourth, it must maintain internal consistency. The story being told right now can't contradict something said 5 minutes ago, or something that might be said 5 minutes from now. The brain has to keep an entire fictional timeline active in working memory. Fifth, it must manage emotional expression. The face must appear sincere, the voice must sound natural, the body must remain relaxed, even while the nervous system is flooding the body with stress hormones. All of this happens in seconds. Psychologists call this mental strain cognitive load. The brain is essentially juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. And just like a physical juggler, the brain sometimes drops something. That dropped object is often time. The brain needs a moment longer to coordinate all these competing demands, just a fraction of a second. But that fraction of a second can be the difference between a story that feels natural and one that leaves you with an unexplained sense of unease. Investigators and behavioral analysts pay close attention to this moment. They know that truthful answers usually appear quickly and naturally. The words flow because they're attached to real experience. But constructed answers, they hesitate, they stumble at the starting line. You can see this pattern in everyday situations. Imagine asking a coworker, "Did you finish the report yesterday?" If the answer is honest, it comes immediately. Yes, I sent it last night. The memory is there, the words are ready. But if the person didn't finish it, the brain suddenly has a problem to solve. In that brief moment, the mind begins searching for an explanation. Maybe the computer crashed. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe the deadline was misunderstood. While that explanation is being built, a tiny pause appears. Again, this pause may only last a second, but behaviorally, it's significant. However, and this is where things become more interesting, not every liar pauses. Some people have learned to anticipate this signal. They've been caught before. They've studied the same psychology you're learning now. And they've developed counter-strategies. Instead of hesitating, they do the opposite. They answer immediately, sometimes too immediately. Imagine asking someone, "Did you take the money from the desk?" And the response arrives before the question has fully left your mouth. No, of course not. Absolutely not. The speed of the answer sounds confident, it sounds definitive, but psychologically it can suggest something else entirely. When a person has prepared a response in advance, when they've rehearsed it, imagined being asked this exact question, crafted the perfect denial, the brain doesn't need time to construct the story. The answer is already loaded, ready to fire at the slightest trigger. Behavioral experts call these preloaded responses, answers that have been mentally rehearsed before the question was even asked. So the key isn't simply the pause itself, it's the pattern surrounding the response. Is the person thinking naturally with the normal rhythm of someone accessing a real memory? Or does the answer appear slightly delayed or strangely immediate? Human behavior reveals itself in these tiny differences. And once you begin noticing them, conversations start to feel very different. But there's another signal that frequently appears when someone is inventing a story. It doesn't appear in the timing of the answer. It appears in the way the story itself is told. Because when people lie, they often try to make their explanation more convincing by adding far more detail than the truth actually requires. Chapter 4. Signal 2. The Too Perfect Story. Have you ever listened to someone explain a situation and noticed they included far more detail than seemed necessary? Not just the basic facts, not just what happened, but the exact time, the precise words someone used, the specific order of events down to the minute, the minor movements, the tangential observations, the irrelevant asides that seem to serve no purpose other than to fill space. At first, this might feel impressive. The story flows smoothly, the timeline is crystal clear, every action and reaction is described as if you were watching a movie script. The person seems to have a remarkable memory for detail. But something about it feels off. That feeling isn't just intuition. It's your brain picking up on subtle clues that the story is too polished, too perfect, too carefully constructed. Psychologists studying deception have found that fabricated memories often become overly structured. Here's why. When someone recalls a real memory, the process is naturally messy. Real experiences aren't stored in neat, linear files. They're stored as fragments, sensory impressions, emotional states, scattered details that the brain stitches together during recall. Think about your own memories. Try to remember a conversation you had last week. Can you recall the exact words, the precise time it started and ended, the specific order of every topic discussed? Probably not. Human memory doesn't work that way. We remember highlights, we remember emotions, we remember the gist. But the fine details, they fade, shift, and reorganize themselves over time. No real memory is perfectly linear. No honest recounting includes every minute detail, because the brain simply doesn't store information that way. Lying is different. The liar's brain must invent a scenario that sounds believable. It has to fill gaps that don't exist. And because the brain is under cognitive load, because it's already juggling multiple tasks, it often overcompensates by adding unnecessary details. Dates, Times, dialogue, minor movements, every action described in exact terms. The story becomes a fortress of specifics designed to withstand any challenge. But here's the paradox. The more detailed the fortress, the more suspicious it becomes. Psychologists call this overcompensation through elaboration. The liar is trying to convince you and themselves that what they're saying is true. But ironically, the abundance of detail often signals the opposite. Truthful stories rarely require such careful construction. Let me give you a real-world example. A manager once asked an employee why a critical report wasn't submitted on time. The employee immediately launched into a long, intricate explanation. They wouldn't give me the data I needed on Tuesday morning, so I emailed the entire team at 10:05 a.m. and waited exactly 47 minutes for a response. When I finally received the files, I noticed one attachment was corrupted, so I had to call IT, which took another 12 minutes. Then I had to reformat the spreadsheet because the columns didn't align, which added 8 minutes. By the time I completed everything, I had missed the submission window by exactly 22 minutes. The story sounded detailed, professional. At first glance, it seemed convincing. But the manager, trained to observe behavioral cues, noticed a pattern. The timeline was unnecessarily exact. The minor details, the 47 minutes, the 12 minutes, the 22 minutes, weren't essential to the story. They were there to sell credibility, but in reality, they created suspicion. Why would someone remember waiting exactly 47 minutes? Why would the IT call be precisely 12 minutes? Why would the final delay be exactly 22 minutes? Real memory doesn't work that way. Real memory would say, I waited forever for the data, then the file was messed up, then IT took a while, and by the time I was done, the deadline had passed. The precision was the giveaway. This is a hallmark of deception. The liar is trying to anticipate every question before it's asked. Every tiny fact is a shield, but the effort itself leaks through, in the tone, in the facial expressions, in the subtle body movements that accompany the too-perfect narrative. Now, think about your own experiences. Have you ever listened to someone tell a story that seemed too perfect, too precise, too rehearsed? Did it make you pause for a moment, even if you couldn't articulate why? That hesitation is your brain noticing the unnatural structure of their memory. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Not all liars deliver excessive detail. Some do the opposite. They provide minimal information, keeping their story vague to avoid giving away inconsistencies. They answer in broad strokes, hoping you won't probe deeper. In those cases, a different signal emerges, one that's just as revealing. The signal hidden in what they don't say. But before we get to that, we need to look at another signal, one that most people completely misunderstand. It involves the eyes, and everything you think you know about eye contact and lying is probably wrong. Chapter 5. Signal 3. The eyes that watch too closely. Most people believe they know how liars use their eyes. It's one of the oldest assumptions about deception. When someone looks away, shifts their gaze, or refuses to meet your eyes, we instinctively think something must be wrong. They can't face us because they're hiding something. The eyes are the windows to the soul, and a liar's soul is looking for the exit. This belief is so deeply embedded in our culture that it's practically instinct. Parents tell children, "Look at me when you're talking to me." Job candidates are coached to maintain strong eye contact during interviews. Police officers are trained to watch for suspects who can't hold their gaze. But modern psychological research has revealed something surprising. Avoiding eye contact is not the most common behavior of a liar. In fact, many liars do the exact opposite. They maintain too much eye contact. Let me explain what I mean. Imagine a normal conversation between two people. Watch how their eyes move. Eye contact naturally flows. It doesn't lock. A person looks at you for a moment, absorbing your expression, then briefly looks away while thinking, remembering, or forming a sentence. The eyes drift to the side or down or into the middle distance as the brain processes information. This rhythm is normal. It's natural. It's unconscious. But when someone is lying, that rhythm can change dramatically. Instead of relaxed eye movement, the person may hold your gaze for longer than usual, longer than feels comfortable, longer than the natural rhythm of conversation would dictate. The eye contact feels steady, intense, sometimes even slightly aggressive. Why would someone do that? The answer lies in how the brain manages deception. When a person lies, they often become intensely concerned about whether the listener believes them. Their attention shifts away from simply telling a story and toward monitoring your reaction. Are you suspicious? Did your eyebrow move? Did your expression change? Did you notice something unusual in their story? To gather this information, the liar watches your face closely, closely enough that they forget to look away, closely enough that their gaze becomes fixed, almost hypnotic. And sometimes they overcompensate deliberately. They've heard the same myth you have, that liars avoid eye contact, so they intentionally hold your gaze to appear trustworthy. They lock on, thinking this will signal honesty. But this strategy often backfires, because when eye contact becomes forced or prolonged, it feels unnatural. It creates a subtle discomfort in the listener, a sense that something about this interaction isn't quite right. Psychologists call this behavior impression monitoring. The liar is trying to measure your belief in real time, adjusting their performance based on your reactions. Let's consider a simple example. A manager asks an employee, "Did you speak with the client about the project delay?" The employee answers immediately, maintaining firm eye contact the entire time. "Yes, I spoke with them yesterday afternoon. Everything is under control." The words sound calm and confident, but something about the eye contact feels unusual. Instead of occasionally glancing away to think or recall details, the employee holds the manager's gaze continuously, almost as if they're studying the manager's reaction. To an untrained observer, this might seem like honesty. Strong eye contact equals confidence, right? But behavioral analysts recognize this as a subtle attempt to monitor belief. The liar is watching closely to see if the story is being accepted. However, and this is crucial, eye behavior alone is never a perfect indicator of deception. Some people naturally maintain strong eye contact. They're engaged listeners. They're present in the conversation. Others avoid eye contact simply because they're shy, neurodivergent, or culturally conditioned to find prolonged eye contact disrespectful. This is why behavioral experts rarely rely on a single signal. They look for patterns. Eye behavior becomes meaningful when it appears alongside other signals, unusual pauses, overly detailed stories, mismatched body language. So the next time you're in a serious conversation, pay attention to the rhythm of eye contact. Does it feel natural and relaxed? Does the person's gaze move with the natural flow of thought? Or does the person seem unusually focused on watching your reaction? Does their gaze feel like it's searching your face for something? Now ask yourself something. Have you ever spoken with someone who looked at you so intensely that it felt almost rehearsed? Did the conversation feel slightly unnatural, even if you couldn't explain why? Your brain may have been detecting subtle behavioral signals long before you consciously understood them. But eye behavior can reveal something even more interesting, because sometimes the truth isn't hidden in how long someone looks at you. It's hidden in a tiny expression that appears for less than a second, an expression so fast that most people never notice it. And yet, psychologists consider it one of the most revealing signals of human emotion. These are known as micro-expressions, and they form the next signal that someone may not be telling the truth. Chapter 6. Signal 4. The half-second truth. Imagine watching someone's face while they speak. Their expression appears calm, their voice sounds steady, their words seem confident. But for just a fraction of a second, something changes. A flash of tension crosses the face. The eyebrows tighten briefly. The lips press together and release. A nostril flares almost imperceptibly. Then it's gone. The calm expression returns, the voice continues, the conversation moves forward. Most people never notice these moments. They happen so quickly, faster than the conscious mind can process, that they simply vanish into the flow of interaction. But psychologists who study human behavior have discovered that these tiny emotional signals can reveal something incredibly important. They are known as micro-expressions. Microexpressions are extremely brief facial reactions that occur when a person's true emotion leaks out before the brain has time to suppress it. They can last less than half a second, sometimes only a few milliseconds. They're gone before you can blink, before you can consciously register what you've seen. Because they happen so quickly, they are almost impossible to fake and even harder to control. To understand why they occur, we need to look at how emotion works in the brain. When something triggers an emotional response, fear, anger, anxiety, stress, the reaction begins in the limbic system, one of the most primitive parts of the brain. This is the emotional center, the part that reacts before the thinking brain has time to intervene. A threat appears, the limbic system floods the body with stress hormones. An insult lands, the limbic system tightens the jaw and narrows the eyes. A fear arises, the limbic system widens the eyes and raises the eyebrows. This emotional response happens automatically in milliseconds. Then, a split second later, the thinking brain catches up. The neocortex, the rational, conscious part, recognizes that this emotion shouldn't be displayed. It sends urgent signals to the face. Control yourself, don't show that, look neutral. But that brief delay between the limbic reaction and the cortical control is where microexpressions appear. By the time the person says, "I'm fine," the face has already flashed the truth. For example, imagine someone being asked a difficult question. "Did you tell anyone about the confidential meeting?" The person answers calmly, "No, of course not." But just before the words appear, there's a brief flicker across the face, a flash of fear, a moment of tension, a sudden tightening around the eyes. The conscious mind quickly regains control and the expression disappears. But for a split second, the face revealed something else. Psychologists studying deception have observed that certain emotional leaks often appear during moments of stress. A fear flash may appear when someone worries their lie could be exposed. The eyebrows rise and draw together, the eyes widen, the mouth stretches horizontally, all in a fraction of a second. A brief anger flicker may appear when someone feels threatened by a question. The eyebrows lower, the eyes narrow, the lips press together, then vanish into a smile. Subtle tension around the mouth or eyes may appear when the brain is struggling to maintain control of emotions, micro-tremors in the facial muscles that last only milliseconds. These expressions are incredibly fast, which is why most people miss them. But trained observers, investigators, negotiators, behavioral analysts learn to recognize these fleeting signals. They train themselves to see in the space between blinks. Consider a real-world scenario. During a corporate investigation, a senior executive was asked whether he had shared confidential financial information with a competitor. He answered confidently, "No, of course not." But just before the words spoke, his face changed for a brief moment. A flash of tension appeared around his eyes. The expression lasted less than a second, then his face returned to a composed, confident look. That tiny signal didn't prove deception by itself, but it suggested that the question had triggered a strong emotional reaction. Something about being asked about confidential information caused a flash of what? Fear? Anger? Anxiety? In behavioral analysis, those reactions are always worth exploring further. Now think about your own conversations. Have you ever seen someone's face change for a split second during a difficult discussion? Perhaps a quick look of irritation, a flash of discomfort, a moment of anxiety that disappeared almost instantly. Did you notice it consciously? Or did your intuition simply tell you that something felt slightly wrong? These fleeting signals are one reason human intuition can sometimes detect dishonesty even when we can't explain why. Your brain registers the microexpression even if your conscious mind doesn't. That's the gut feeling that something is off, the sense that the person's face didn't quite match their words. But microexpressions are only part of the puzzle, because sometimes the face reveals something different altogether. Sometimes the words say one thing while the body quietly communicates another.
And when those signals don't match, the human brain often senses the conflict immediately.
Chapter 7, Signal 5, When the Body Betrays the Words. Have you ever heard someone say they were completely fine while their body seemed to say the exact opposite? Maybe their words sounded calm and reassuring. I'm not upset. Everything is okay. There's nothing to worry about. But something about their posture felt wrong. Their shoulders were tight, lifted slightly toward their ears. Their hands moved nervously, touching their face or adjusting their clothes. Their torso angled away from you, as if preparing to leave. Their feet pointed towards the door. The words said one thing, the body said another. Moments like this often create a strange feeling during conversations. You may not be able to explain it logically, but something inside you senses a contradiction. The person is telling you they're fine, but every nonverbal signal is screaming otherwise. That feeling exists for a reason. Human communication is not limited to words. In fact, psychologists estimate that a large portion of emotional information is conveyed through nonverbal behavior, facial expressions, posture, gestures, and physical movement. Some research suggests that as much as 60 to 70% of meaning in face-to-face communication comes from body language. When a person is telling the truth, their words and body language usually move in the same direction. They're aligned, congruent. The story feels natural, the tone matches the message, the body supports the meaning of the words. But when someone is lying, this harmony can break down. Because while the conscious mind is busy constructing a believable story, inventing details, maintaining consistency, monitoring your reaction, the body may still be responding to the emotional stress of deception. This creates what psychologists call behavioral incongruity, a mismatch between verbal communication and physical signals. The words say one thing, the body quietly says another. Imagine a simple situation. A friend arrives late to meet you and says, "Sorry, traffic was terrible." The explanation sounds reasonable. It's the most common excuse in the world. But as they speak, their body shows signs of tension. Their arms cross tightly across their chest. Their feet shift repeatedly. Their posture leans slightly away from you as if preparing to leave. Their feet point towards the door. Individually, none of these signals prove anything. People cross their arms when they're cold. They shift their feet when they're tired. They lean away when they're uncomfortable. But together, these signals can create a subtle sense that the story and the behavior are not fully aligned. Now, consider a more serious example. During a relationship conversation, one partner asks, "Did you talk to them again?" The other person responds quickly, "No, I told you I wouldn't." But while the words sound confident, the person's body behaves differently. Their shoulders lift slightly in tension, the classic shrug muscle movement without the actual shrug. Their hands briefly touch their face, a common pacifying behavior during stress. Their torso turns away just a little, as if creating distance from the conversation. Their feet point towards the door. These movements happen unconsciously. The person isn't aware they're doing them. They're focused on the story, on the words, on maintaining the lie. But the body is an honest messenger. Not because it reveals the truth directly, but because it sometimes reveals emotional discomfort that the words try to hide. Behavioral experts often describe the body as the leakage channel. When the mind is occupied with constructing a lie, it has fewer resources available to control the body, so the body leaks the truth. However, this is where careful observation becomes essential. A single gesture rarely means much by itself. Context matters. Baseline matters. This is why behavioral psychologists focus on clusters of signals rather than isolated movements. When several mismatches appear at the same time, conflicting tone, tense posture, nervous gestures, pacifying behaviors, the pattern becomes more meaningful. For example, a person says, "I'm telling the truth,"
While their shoulders rise in tension, their hands touch their throat, a pacifying behavior during stress, and their body angles away from you. That's three nonverbal signals contradicting the verbal message. The pattern is harder to dismiss. Now, pause for a moment and reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever spoken with someone whose explanation sounded convincing, but their body language created a strange sense of doubt? Maybe you couldn't explain it at the time. Maybe you dismissed it as overthinking, but something inside you noticed that the words and the behavior were not moving together. Human intuition works exactly this way. Your brain collects tiny signals from posture, facial movement, and tone of voice and quietly compares them to the message being spoken. And when the signals don't align, your mind begins to question the story. But body language is only part of the picture, because sometimes the most revealing signal of deception isn't visible at all. Sometimes it appears in the voice. A subtle shift in pitch, a strained tone, a brief tightening in the throat, signals that the body is experiencing stress while the words try to sound calm. Chapter 8. Signal 6. The voice that cracks under pressure. Imagine asking someone a direct question. At first, their answer sounds normal. The words are clear, the explanation seems reasonable, the tone is measured and calm. But as they continue speaking, you notice something subtle in their voice. The pitch becomes slightly higher. Their throat tightens for a moment. They pause briefly to clear their throat. Their words begin to come faster, almost rushed, or they slow down, stretching out each word as if buying time. Most people would dismiss these signals immediately. After all, voices change for many reasons. Someone might be tired, nervous, or simply speaking quickly. A cold can affect the voice. Allergies can cause throat clearing. Stress from work can tighten the vocal cords. But psychologists studying deception have discovered that stress often changes the human voice in predictable ways, ways that can signal deception even when the words themselves are perfectly crafted. To understand why, we need to look at how the body reacts when a person feels pressure. When someone tells a lie, the brain often experiences a form of stress, even if the person appears calm on the surface, even if their face is composed and their body is still, their nervous system may still be reacting internally. The brain recognizes the risk. If the lie is exposed, there will be consequences: damage to reputation, loss of trust, professional or personal fallout. This perception of risk triggers the autonomic nervous system, the same system responsible for the fight or flight response. The body begins to release small amounts of stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol. And when this system activates, several physical changes occur. The heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, breathing patterns shift, muscles tighten throughout the body. One of the areas affected by this tension is the vocal cords. The vocal cords are extremely sensitive to stress. They're suspended in a complex network of muscles, all of which respond to the body's state of arousal. When the surrounding muscles tighten, the vocal cords are pulled slightly tighter as well. This changes the sound of the voice. The pitch can rise. The voice may sound thinner, higher, more strained. The natural resonance may diminish. The person might feel the need to clear their throat more frequently as the throat muscles constrict. These changes are often very subtle. Unless you're listening specifically for them, you might not notice at all. But when someone is under pressure, especially during questioning, the voice can reveal stress that the person is trying desperately to hide. For example, imagine a conversation between a supervisor and an employee. The supervisor asks a simple question: "Did you authorize that transaction?" The employee responds calmly at first: "No, I didn't." But as the conversation continues, the explanation becomes longer. "Well, I looked at the documents, but I didn't actually approve anything. I was just reviewing them, and then I got pulled into another meeting, so I never got back to it." During this explanation, the employee's voice changes. It becomes slightly tighter. The pitch rises just enough to sound different from the beginning of the conversation. A small throat-clearing interruption appears in the middle of the sentence. Their words come faster as they rush to finish the explanation. Individually, these changes may not mean much, but in combination, they suggest that the topic is creating physiological stress. Another example can appear during phone conversations. Imagine calling a colleague and asking about a missed deadline. At first, their voice sounds relaxed. They greet you warmly. They ask how you're doing. But when you mention the deadline, their tone changes. The pitch increases slightly. The words begin to come faster, as if they're trying to move past the topic quickly. They might interrupt you or redirect the conversation. The change may only last a few seconds, but it can suggest that the question triggered internal pressure. Of course, voice changes alone do not prove deception. People's voices naturally fluctuate depending on emotion, fatigue, and personality. Some individuals naturally speak with a higher pitch when they feel nervous, even when telling the truth. Some people clear their throat habitually. Some people talk fast because they're naturally fast talkers. This is why behavioral psychologists emphasize the importance of patterns rather than isolated signals. When voice changes appear alongside other cues, delayed responses, overly detailed stories, tense body language, micro-expressions of fear, the pattern becomes more meaningful. The voice is just one channel, but when multiple channels align, the signal grows stronger. Now consider your own conversations. Have you ever asked someone a question and noticed their voice suddenly change? Perhaps their tone became sharper, slightly strained, or unusually quick. Did you feel a subtle sense that something about the answer wasn't entirely comfortable for them? Your brain may have been detecting small vocal signals before your conscious mind fully understood them. But sometimes, the most revealing reaction to a question isn't stress in the voice. Sometimes, the reaction is something completely different. Instead of answering calmly, the person suddenly becomes defensive. They challenge the question itself. They question your motives. They try to turn the conversation back towards you. And this reaction can reveal another powerful psychological signal that someone may not want to answer truthfully.
Chapter 9. Signal 7. The Defensive Wall. Imagine asking someone a simple, straightforward question. Nothing accusatory, nothing aggressive, just a direct request for information. Instead of answering calmly, their reaction changes instantly. Their voice becomes sharper, their posture stiffens, their eyes narrow, and rather than responding to the question, they challenge the question itself. Why would you even ask that? Don't you trust me? Where is this coming from? What are you trying to imply? Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the original topic. It has shifted to your motives for asking the question. You're now on the defensive, explaining why you asked, justifying your curiosity, proving that your question was reasonable. This reaction is surprisingly common in situations where someone feels psychologically cornered. Instead of addressing the information being requested, the person redirects the focus away from the answer and on to the questioner. Psychologists often refer to this as deflection behavior. To understand why it happens, we need to consider what the brain experiences when a lie is threatened. When someone is hiding information and a direct question appears, the brain immediately recognizes a risk. If the truth is revealed, it could damage reputation, relationships, or trust. The stakes suddenly feel very high. At that moment, the mind searches for a strategy to reduce the pressure, to escape the spotlight. One strategy is to answer the question with another explanation, a lie, a half-truth, a convenient excuse. But another strategy, sometimes even faster, more automatic, is to challenge the question itself. By attacking the question, the person creates a new emotional dynamic. The focus shifts away from the original issue and towards something else, your intentions, your trust, your motives for asking the question. This tactic often works surprisingly well in everyday conversations.
Because when someone becomes defensive, the other person may begin to feel uncomfortable for asking the question in the first place. They might think, maybe I was being too suspicious, maybe I shouldn't have asked, maybe I'm the problem here. The conversation shifts, the pressure dissipates, and the original topic quietly disappears. Let's imagine a common example. A partner asks a simple question during a conversation. Did you call them yesterday? Instead of answering calmly, the response comes quickly with an edge of frustration. Why are you asking me that? Why do you always have to question everything I do? The question itself has now become the center of attention. The partner may immediately feel pressure to explain their curiosity. I was just wondering. It's not a big deal. I didn't mean anything by it. And just like that, the focus has moved away from whether the call happened. The defensive reaction has successfully redirected the conversation. This behavior appears in many situations: relationships, workplaces, negotiations, even casual social interactions. Consider another example in a professional setting. A manager asks an employee about a missing document. Did you send the revised file to the client? Instead of simply answering, the employee responds with irritation. Why are you questioning me about this? I've been working all day. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? I feel like I'm constantly being watched. Again, the response does not address the question directly. Instead, it introduces new emotional layers: frustration, victimhood, challenge. From a psychological perspective, this reaction serves as a protective mechanism. When someone feels exposed or uncertain about their explanation, attacking the question buys time and shifts attention. It puts the other person on the defensive. It changes the subject without appearing to change the subject. Of course, not every defensive response means a person is lying. People sometimes react defensively when they feel unfairly accused or emotionally overwhelmed. Someone who has been falsely accused multiple times may develop a hair-trigger defensive response. Someone who is under extreme stress from other areas of life may snap at innocent questions. This is why behavioral experts look at how quickly the defensiveness appears and how proportional it is to the question. If a simple, neutral question immediately triggers irritation, anger, or suspicion, it may suggest that the topic itself carries emotional pressure. The person isn't just frustrated, they're threatened. And emotional pressure is often where hidden information exists. The key is proportionality. A proportional defensive response might sound like, I'm a little confused why you're asking. Can you help me understand what this is about? A disproportional defensive response sounds like, why are you always interrogating me? I'm so tired of this. You never trust anything I say. The first seeks clarification, the second seeks to shut down the inquiry. Now think about your own experiences. Have you ever asked someone a normal question and received a reaction that felt strangely defensive? Perhaps the intensity of the response surprised you. Instead of answering calmly, the person seemed more concerned about why you asked. Your brain may have recognized that the emotional reaction did not match the simplicity of the question. But here's where human behavior becomes even more fascinating. Not every person responds to pressure with defensiveness. Some individuals use a completely different strategy. Instead of resisting questions, they become unusually agreeable. They cooperate more than expected. They offer reassurance, transparency, and openness. They invite scrutiny. And sometimes that behavior can hide something just as interesting beneath the surface.
Chapter 10, Signal 8, The Transparency Trap. When people imagine someone hiding the truth, they often picture resistance. They imagine nervous answers, defensive reactions, someone trying to avoid questions entirely, deflecting, changing the subject. And sometimes that does happen. But in many situations, the opposite response appears. Instead of resisting questions, the person becomes unusually cooperative. They seem eager to help. They offer reassurance repeatedly. They invite you to verify their story. They go out of their way to appear transparent. You can check everything if you want. Go ahead, look through my messages. I have nothing to hide. Ask me anything.
I want you to feel completely comfortable. At first glance, this behavior feels reassuring. Transparency is usually associated with honesty. When someone willingly offers access to information, when they invite scrutiny, when they seem completely open, it often signals confidence. An honest person has nothing to fear from examination. But psychologists studying deception have discovered that extreme cooperation can sometimes be a strategic behavior rather than a natural one. This behavior is known as impression management. Impression management occurs when a person carefully shapes their actions to influence how others perceive them. It's a form of social performance, a way of controlling the narrative about who you are and what you stand for. In the context of deception, the goal is simple: appear so open and trustworthy that suspicion disappears entirely. When someone feels pressure or believes their story might be questioned, they may try to overwhelm that suspicion with exaggerated transparency. Instead of simply answering a question, they go further. They add assurances, they emphasize their honesty, they highlight their willingness to cooperate. They repeatedly signal that they have nothing to hide. Ironically, this effort can sometimes feel slightly unnatural, because in normal conversations, truly honest people rarely feel the need to prove their honesty repeatedly. They answer questions, they provide information, they move on. They don't perform transparency because transparency is simply their default state. But someone who is managing an impression performs transparency. They make sure you see how open they're being. They want credit for their cooperation. Let's consider a workplace example. A company manager notices irregularities in a project report and begins asking questions during a meeting. One employee quickly responds, "I promise I didn't make any changes to those numbers. You can check my emails, my files, my computer, everything. I'm completely open about this. Whatever you need to see, I'm happy to show you." The response sounds cooperative. It sounds transparent. But the level of reassurance may seem disproportionate to the question. The manager simply asked a question. The employee responded with a full-scale transparency campaign. Instead of calmly explaining the situation, the employee emphasizes openness again and again. "Seriously, go ahead and check anything you want. I want you to feel comfortable. I have nothing to hide." Behavioral analysts sometimes notice that this kind of exaggerated openness can function as a psychological shield. By appearing extremely cooperative, the person hopes to reduce further investigation. The message becomes, "Someone this open couldn't possibly be hiding something. Look how eager they are to help. Look how confident they are." And in many cases, that strategy works. People tend to trust individuals who project confidence and transparency. We're conditioned to believe that openness equals honesty, but careful observers look for a pattern. Is the cooperation natural and relaxed? Does it feel like a normal response to a normal question? Or does it feel slightly forced, almost as if the person is trying too hard to appear trustworthy? Another example can appear in personal relationships. Imagine asking someone whether they spoke with a particular person. Instead of giving a simple answer, the response becomes very enthusiastic. "Of course not. You can look through my phone if you want. Here, take it. I don't mind at all. I want you to trust me." The offer may sound generous. It may sound like the ultimate proof of honesty. But sometimes the person knows the evidence won't actually be found there. The transparency being offered is carefully chosen. They're offering access to something that won't incriminate them, creating the illusion of complete openness while protecting the real information. This is why behavioral psychologists focus on behavior clusters rather than single signals. Excessive cooperation alone does not prove deception. Some people are naturally open and accommodating. Some people have learned that transparency is the best policy and practice it consistently. But when overly cooperative behavior appears alongside other signals, nervous tone, story inconsistencies, emotional tension, it can become more meaningful. The question becomes, why is this person trying so hard to prove something that should be self-evident? Now think about your own conversations. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed almost eager to prove their honesty? Someone who repeatedly emphasized how transparent they were? Someone who offered access before you even asked? Did the reassurance feel natural, or did it feel slightly exaggerated? Your brain may have been detecting subtle signs of impression management, but even the most carefully managed story has a weakness. Because lies must remain consistent over time. And when a story is invented rather than remembered, small details often begin to change.
Chapter 11. Signal 9. The story that shifts. Imagine asking someone about an event that happened earlier in the week. They explain it clearly. The story flows smoothly. The details seem organized and logical. The timeline makes sense. The explanation feels complete. At that moment, everything appears reasonable. But later, the same conversation comes up again, maybe a day later, maybe a week later, maybe just an hour later, when you ask a follow-up question about a specific detail, and something small has changed. A different time, a different sequence of events. A detail that wasn't mentioned before suddenly appears. A detail that was mentioned before has now disappeared. The reason for being late has shifted from traffic to an emergency at home. At first, the change may seem harmless. Human memory isn't perfect after all. People forget things. People remember things differently over time. A small inconsistency doesn't necessarily mean deception. But psychologists studying deception have noticed an important difference between real memories and fabricated ones. True memories tend to remain relatively stable. The wording may change slightly when someone tells the story again. They might use different words to describe the same events. They might omit minor details that don't seem important. They might summarize parts that they elaborated on before. But the core structure usually stays the same. The order of events, the main actions, the key details, these remain consistent because they are connected to an actual experience stored in the brain. The memory has anchors. It's rooted in something real. Fabricated memories work differently. When someone invents a story, the brain is not recalling something that happened. There is no actual experience to anchor the narrative. Instead, the brain is reconstructing the invention each time the story is told. And because the story does not exist as a real memory, because there's no neural pathway leading back to an actual event, maintaining perfect consistency becomes extremely difficult. Small elements shift without the person realizing it. The timeline drifts. The order of events rearranges itself. New details appear to fill gaps the person didn't notice before. Old details disappear because they were never anchored in real experience. This is why investigators and behavioral analysts often pay close attention to story repetition. When a story is told multiple times, they listen for subtle changes. Did the timeline move slightly? Did a new detail appear that wasn't mentioned earlier? Did the explanation suddenly become shorter or more elaborate? Does the second version contradict the first one in any way? These shifts occur because the brain is struggling to maintain a narrative that was never experienced directly. Each retelling is a new construction, and each construction introduces the possibility of error. Let's consider a simple example. An employee tells their manager they missed a meeting because they were stuck in traffic. The explanation seems straightforward. There was an accident on the highway and it delayed everything. I was stuck for almost an hour. Later that afternoon, the topic comes up again in conversation with another colleague. The employee mentions the missed meeting. Now the explanation sounds slightly different.
I left home late because traffic was heavy near the office. By the time I got here, the meeting was already over. Both explanations might appear reasonable on their own. Traffic happens, accidents happen, delays happen. But together they reveal a small inconsistency. In the first version, the delay came from an accident on the highway. In the second version, the delay happened because the person left home late and traffic was heavy near the office. These aren't the same explanations, they're different stories that serve the same purpose. The person telling them may not notice the shift. They're focused on the message, "I missed the meeting," not on the precise details of how it happened. But the inconsistency is there, waiting to be noticed. This pattern appears frequently in situations where people are asked the same question multiple times. Each retelling requires the brain to reconstruct the explanation again, and with each reconstruction, there's a chance that something changes. Of course, truthful stories can also change slightly over time. Human memory naturally fades and reorganizes details. 2 weeks after an event, you might remember it differently than you did the day after. That's normal, that's human. But the key difference lies in structural stability. When someone remembers a real experience, the central events remain consistent, even if minor details fade. The core story doesn't change. The person doesn't suddenly remember being somewhere they weren't, or doing something they didn't do. When someone fabricates a story, the foundation itself may shift. The core events can change because there is no core, only a series of constructions. This is why investigators sometimes revisit the same topic repeatedly during interviews. They're not just listening to the answer, they're listening to how the story evolves. They ask the same question in different ways. They ask about different angles. They come back to the topic after discussing other things. And they watch for the story to shift. Now pause and reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever heard someone tell a story twice and noticed that the details didn't quite match the first version? Perhaps the change was subtle, a different time, a different location, a different reason for the same outcome. Maybe you dismissed it at the time. You told yourself you misremembered or that it wasn't important, but your mind likely noticed the difference. Human intuition is very sensitive to narrative inconsistencies. Your brain naturally compares new information with what it heard earlier, and when the pieces don't align, suspicion begins to grow. But even inconsistent stories don't always reveal the full picture. Because when a person feels increasing pressure, another signal often appears. At first, the person may seem calm, but as the questions continue, something begins to change emotionally. The voice tightens, the patience fades, the emotional mask begins to crack, and eventually, the pressure becomes too much to contain.
Chapter 12, Signal 10, When the Mask Cracks. Imagine a conversation that begins calmly. A simple question is asked, the answer comes smoothly, the explanation sounds reasonable. The person seems composed, in control, comfortable. But then the topic returns again. Another question appears, and then another, and then another. At first, the person continues to respond confidently. Their tone remains controlled, their story seems steady, their body language remains relaxed. But slowly, subtly, something begins to change. The voice becomes sharper, the answers become shorter, patience starts to fade, frustration begins to seep through. The emotional tone shifts in a way that feels different from the beginning of the conversation. Eventually, the pressure shows itself. A flash of anger, a moment of despair, a sudden withdrawal, tears, silence, explosion. This is what psychologists often call emotional leakage under pressure. When someone is maintaining a lie, the brain must constantly manage several tasks at once. It must remember the invented story, it must suppress the real memory, it must monitor the listener's reaction, it must maintain emotional control, it must keep the story consistent with everything said before.
For a short time, the mind can handle this balancing act. Minutes, sometimes hours, the liar can maintain the performance. But when questioning continues, when the pressure builds, when the same topics return, when the scrutiny intensifies, the mental load becomes heavier and emotional control can begin to weaken. At that point, hidden emotions may start to appear. Sometimes the reaction is frustration. The person becomes irritated that the topic keeps returning. They've already answered. Why are you still asking? Their answers become clipped, shorter, sharper. Their tone carries a hint of annoyance that wasn't there before. Sometimes the reaction is stronger. A sudden burst of anger may appear. What are you trying to imply? Why do you keep asking me the same thing? I've already told you everything. This emotional shift can feel surprising, especially if the conversation started calmly. The intensity seems disproportionate to the situation. Another common reaction is withdrawal. Instead of fighting, the person shuts down emotionally. Their answers become vague, monosyllabic. They may avoid eye contact. They may look down, turn away, or physically create distance. They may try to end the conversation entirely. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Can we just drop it? I have nothing else to say. Psychologists believe these reactions occur because the brain is reaching its limit. Maintaining deception requires continuous mental effort. It's like holding a heavy weight above your head. For a while, you can do it. Your muscles hold, your focus remains. But eventually, fatigue sets in. The weight becomes heavier, the muscles begin to tremble, and eventually something has to give. The same happens with emotional control. As the mental load of deception continues, the brain has fewer resources available for emotional regulation. The mask begins to slip. The real feelings, frustration, fear, anger, despair, begin to leak out. Let's consider a simple example. Imagine a discussion between two coworkers about a missing project file. At first, the conversation feels relaxed. One coworker explains that they don't know what happened to the file. They seem calm, helpful, willing to assist. Later, the topic returns during another meeting. The same question appears again. Are you sure you didn't move the document? Now the tone of the response changes slightly. Still polite, but there's an edge. I already told you I didn't touch it. Later still, the subject comes up a third time. A supervisor asks about the missing file in a team meeting. This time, the reaction becomes more emotional. The coworker's face flushes, their voice rises. Why do you keep asking me about this? I said I didn't do it. I'm tired of being questioned about this. It's not my fault. The emotional intensity has increased significantly. The frustration may not prove deception on its own. Anyone can become frustrated when they feel repeatedly questioned or misunderstood. Anyone can become angry when they feel falsely accused. Anyone can withdraw when they feel emotionally exhausted. This is why psychologists emphasize an important principle. No single signal proves deception. Human behavior is complex. Context always matters. Baseline always matters. Instead, deception is usually recognized through patterns, small pauses, unusual eye contact, overly detailed stories, shifting narratives, emotional reactions under pressure. When these signals appear together, when they cluster around specific topics, when they emerge consistently, they begin to form a clearer picture. The single signals are threads. Alone, each thread is weak, easily explained, easily dismissed. But woven together, they form a rope, and that rope can hold weight.
Chapter 13. Why We Lie, the Hidden Architecture of Deception. Now that we've explored the 10 signals, we need to step back and ask a deeper question. Why do humans lie so frequently, even when they know the truth might eventually surface? Even when the stakes are high and the consequences severe? What drives the brain to take that risk? Psychologists who study deception have spent decades examining this exact question, and what they've discovered reveals something profound about human nature.
Lying is not a rare or abnormal behavior. It's not something only bad people do. In fact, research suggests that the average person tells 1 to 2 lies per day. Most of these lies are small, social lubricants that smooth the rough edges of daily interaction. I'm fine. Traffic was terrible. I love your haircut. I'll call you right back. These lies aren't designed to harm. They're designed to protect feelings, to protect relationships, to protect ourselves from awkwardness, conflict, or judgment. Psychologists often describe these as social lies or prosocial lies. They exist because human relationships are delicate. Absolute honesty in every moment would damage friendships, embarrass others, create unnecessary conflict. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is soften the truth. But there's another category of lies, the ones that cause harm, the lies that hide mistakes, conceal infidelity, cover up wrongdoing, manipulate for personal gain. Why do people tell these lies? The answer often comes down to 3 factors: fear, shame, and perceived necessity. Fear. Fear of consequences. If I admit what I did, I will be punished. I will lose something important. My reputation will be damaged. My relationship will end. My job will be at risk. The lie feels like protection against these outcomes. Shame about the truth. The truth makes me look bad. It reveals something I don't want anyone to know. It exposes a part of myself I'm not proud of. The lie allows me to present a better version of myself, one that's more competent, more honest, more worthy of respect. And perceived necessity. I had no choice. The situation forced me into this corner. If I told the truth, it would cause more harm than good. The lie is framed as the only reasonable option. In the moment of deception, these factors create powerful motivation. The brain weighs the immediate risk of telling the truth against the potential reward of concealing it, and often the path of least resistance is the lie. But here's what the liar doesn't consider in that moment: the cognitive load, the mental strain of maintaining the fiction, the constant vigilance required to keep the story straight, the fear of exposure that lingers beneath the surface. Lying is not the easy option. It's the option that seems easy in the moment, but becomes harder with every passing hour, every follow-up question, every moment the liar must continue performing. This is why deception leaves traces, because the brain was never designed to sustain fiction indefinitely. It was designed to process reality, and when it's forced to do otherwise, it leaks. Chapter 14. The Truth About Truth-Tellers. Before we go further, it's essential to understand something important. Not every pause means deception. Not every detailed story is a lie. Not every defensive reaction signals guilt. Human behavior is complex, and context is everything. A person may pause before answering simply because they're thinking carefully. Some people are naturally thoughtful responders. They process information slowly and deliberately. A pause from them means nothing. Someone might avoid eye contact because they feel shy, uncomfortable, or socially anxious. They might be on the autism spectrum, where eye contact feels overwhelming. They might come from a culture where prolonged eye contact is considered disrespectful. A voice may rise in pitch due to stress, fatigue, or emotion, even when the person is telling the complete truth. A difficult conversation about a painful topic will naturally create emotional responses. This is why psychologists who study deception emphasize a crucial principle: establish a baseline. Before you can detect deviations, you need to know what normal looks like for this person. How do they normally answer questions? What's their natural speaking rhythm? How much eye contact do they usually maintain? How do they typically react to stress? Only by establishing this baseline can you recognize when something has shifted. Imagine you're interviewing someone for a job. You ask them about their previous experience. They answer comfortably with natural pauses and normal eye contact. Later, you ask them about a gap in their resume. Suddenly, their behavior changes. Their answers become delayed, their eye contact becomes intense, their voice tightens. That shift from their baseline to this new behavior is meaningful. The same person, the same conversation, different responses. This is why behavioral experts watch for clusters of changes, not isolated signals. One signal can be explained away. Multiple signals appearing together, especially around specific topics, create a pattern worth noticing. So as you learn to recognize these signals, remember this principle. You're not looking for proof, you're looking for patterns. You're not becoming a human lie detector, you're becoming a more observant participant in human conversation.
Chapter 15. The Ethics of Awareness. With this knowledge comes responsibility. Understanding deception signals is not a license to become suspicious of everyone around you. It's not a tool for interrogating friends, family, and colleagues. It's not a weapon to be wielded in every conversation. The goal of understanding deception is not to judge people more harshly. It's to understand them more deeply. Because behind every lie, there's a human reason: fear, shame, protection, insecurity, a desperate attempt to maintain control in a situation that feels out of control. When you recognize these signals, you have a choice. You can use them to confront, accuse, and demand the truth. Or you can use them to understand, to ask better questions, to create safety for the truth to emerge. Think about the people in your life, the ones you love, the ones you work with, the ones you encounter every day. If you notice these signals in someone close to you, what's your goal? Is it to catch them in a lie? To prove you were right? To win some invisible game of deception detection? Or is it to understand what's really happening, to address the fear or shame that's driving the deception, to create a relationship where the truth feels safer than the lie? This is the deeper application of this knowledge. Because people don't lie to people they trust completely. They lie when the truth feels dangerous. They lie when they're afraid of how you'll react. They lie when they don't feel safe enough to be honest. The most powerful use of deception awareness isn't catching liars. It's becoming the kind of person people don't need to lie to. Someone who responds to difficult truths with understanding rather than punishment. Someone who creates safety rather than threat. Someone who can handle the truth even when it's uncomfortable. When you become that person, the lies around you will naturally decrease, not because you've gotten better at detecting them, but because people no longer feel the need to tell them. Chapter 16. The Pattern Recognition Mindset. After exploring these 10 signals, one important idea becomes clear. Human deception is rarely revealed by a single behavior. There is no universal gesture that instantly proves someone is lying, no single expression, pause, or movement that can expose the truth with absolute certainty. Human behavior is far more complex than that. A person may pause before answering simply because they are thinking carefully. Someone might avoid eye contact because they feel shy or uncomfortable. A voice may rise in pitch due to stress, fatigue, or emotion, even when the person is telling the truth. This is why psychologists who study deception rarely focus on isolated signals. Instead, they look for patterns, patterns of behavior that appear together. A delayed response combined with an overly detailed explanation. Intense eye contact appearing alongside subtle emotional tension. A story that changes slightly each time it is told. Emotional reactions that grow stronger as questioning continues. Multiple signals clustering around specific topics. When several of these signals appear together, the picture becomes more meaningful. The skill, therefore, is not about spotting one dramatic clue. The real skill lies in learning to observe the overall pattern of human behavior. It's about developing what behavioral experts call situational awareness, the ability to notice what's happening in front of you without filtering it through assumptions or expectations.
This means paying attention to how quickly answers come. Is there a natural flow, or are there hesitations and accelerations that feel off? Are they too detailed or too vague? Do they change over time? Do they feel rehearsed or authentic? Do the words match the body language? Does the tone match the message? Is everything aligned, or is there friction between channels? How does the person react to different topics? Where does the pressure build? Where do emotions leak? What's normal for this person? How do they usually communicate? What shifts when certain subjects arise? When you develop this awareness, conversations start to feel different. You're not just hearing words, you're seeing the full architecture of human communication, the visible and the invisible, the spoken and the unspoken. And in that expanded awareness, the truth becomes harder to hide. Chapter 17. Real-World Application. Let's bring all of this together with a practical example. Imagine you're in a meeting at work. A project has gone wrong. Deadlines were missed. A client is unhappy. The team is gathered to understand what happened. One of your colleagues is asked about their role in the project. Watch what happens. First, notice the baseline. How does this person normally speak in meetings? Are they confident, nervous, talkative, reserved? Establish what normal looks like before the difficult questions begin. Now the question comes. Can you walk us through what happened with your part of the project? Watch for the initial response. Is there a pause before they begin? A fraction of a second longer than usual? Then listen to the story they tell. Is it too detailed? Do they provide exact times, specific conversations, minute-by-minute accounts that seem almost too precise? Or is it too vague, lacking the specifics you'd expect from someone who was actually there? Watch their eyes as they speak. Are they maintaining natural eye contact, looking away occasionally as they think? Or are they locked onto you, watching your reaction, monitoring whether you believe them? Look for micro-expressions. Does a flash of tension cross their face when certain details are mentioned? A brief tightening around the eyes? A momentary compression of the lips? Observe their body. Are their words and body aligned? Or is there tension in their shoulders, pacifying gestures near their face, a body angle that suggests they'd rather be anywhere else? Listen to their voice. Does it stay steady throughout, or does it tighten when they reach the sensitive parts of the story? Does the pitch rise? Do they clear their throat? Notice how they handle follow-up questions. Do they answer directly, or do they become defensive? Do they challenge the questions, question your motives, redirect the conversation? Pay attention to how cooperative they are. Are they naturally helpful, or does their cooperation feel exaggerated, almost performative? And if the topic comes up again later, in another meeting, in a private conversation, listen for inconsistencies. Does the story shift? Did the details change? Does the timeline move? Finally, watch what happens as the pressure builds. If the questioning continues, how does their emotional state evolve? Do they remain calm, or does frustration begin to leak? Do they withdraw? Do they explode? None of these signals alone proves anything. But when several appear together, when the pause, the detailed story, the intense eye contact, the defensive reactions, the shifting narrative, and the emotional leakage all cluster around the same topic, a pattern emerges. And that pattern is worth paying attention to. Chapter 18. The Mirror. Seeing Ourselves. There's one more dimension to this exploration that we haven't addressed. Because deception is not something that only other people do. In truth, every human being lies at times, including you, including me. Sometimes the lies are small, a polite compliment that isn't entirely sincere, an excuse for being late, a simple, "I'm fine," when we're actually tired, frustrated, or hurting. Other lies are more complex. We hide our mistakes to protect our reputation. We avoid telling the full truth to prevent conflict. We reshape stories slightly to make ourselves appear more capable, more successful, more confident. We omit details that might make us look bad. Understanding deception means understanding ourselves. Once we recognize how easily small signals appear when people are under pressure, we may begin to notice those signals in ourselves. Moments when we hesitate before answering. Moments when our voice tightens during an uncomfortable conversation. Moments when we add extra details to make our story more convincing. Moments when we become defensive because a question hit too close to the truth. Moments when we try to shape our words carefully to protect our image. Recognizing these patterns in ourselves can create something powerful: self-awareness. And from self-awareness comes empathy. Instead of viewing deception only as manipulation, we begin to see it as part of the broader landscape of human psychology, a reflection of fear, pride, insecurity, and social survival. People lie because they're afraid. People lie because they're ashamed. People lie because they don't see another way. People lie because the truth feels too dangerous to speak. This doesn't excuse harmful deception. It doesn't mean we should ignore lies that cause damage. But it does mean we can approach deception with more understanding and less judgment. The goal of understanding deception is not to catch people. It's to understand them more deeply. Chapter 19. Beyond Deception: The Architecture of Trust. Now we arrive at the final question. If deception is so common, if it leaves so many traces, if it's woven into the fabric of human interaction, how do we build relationships where the truth can flourish? How do we become people who don't need to be deceived? The answer lies in understanding what makes truth feel safe. Research in psychology and neuroscience has identified several conditions that encourage honesty. Safety. When people believe that telling the truth won't result in punishment, rejection, or harm, they're more likely to be honest. This doesn't mean there are no consequences, but the consequences feel manageable rather than catastrophic. Acceptance. When people feel accepted as they are, flaws and all, they don't need to hide. The truth may be uncomfortable, but it won't change how they're viewed or valued. Proportionality. When responses to mistakes are proportional to the mistake itself, people don't need to exaggerate or minimize. They can simply state what happened and deal with the actual consequences. Curiosity over judgment. When questions are asked from a place of genuine curiosity rather than accusation, defensiveness decreases. The goal becomes understanding rather than punishment. Consistency. When people know what to expect from us, when our reactions are predictable rather than volatile, they can make informed decisions about what to share. Consistency builds trust. These conditions don't guarantee honesty, but they create an environment where honesty is more likely. And this is where the signals we've explored become most valuable. Not as tools for catching deception, but as indicators where safety is lacking. When you notice someone becoming defensive, it may signal that they don't feel safe being questioned. When you notice someone's voice tightening, it may signal that they're under pressure they can't express. When you notice a story shifting, it may signal that the person is struggling to maintain a narrative they're not comfortable with. These signals are invitations. Invitations to ask better questions. Invitations to create more safety. Invitations to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. Chapter 20. The Final Reflection. So here's where we end. Not with a simple checklist for catching liars, but with a deeper understanding of human communication. The truth is rarely hidden in one dramatic moment. It usually reveals itself quietly, through the subtle patterns of human behavior. A pause that reveals hesitation, a story that's too perfectly constructed, eyes that watch too closely, a face that flickers with hidden emotion, a body that contradicts the words being spoken, a voice that tightens under pressure, a defensive reaction that appears from nowhere, cooperation that feels slightly too eager, a story that shifts and changes over time, emotions that leak when the pressure becomes too much. These are the 10 fractures, the places where deception breaks apart and the truth seeps through. Learning to recognize them doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone around you. It doesn't mean turning every conversation into an investigation. It means developing awareness. Awareness of how the human mind works. Awareness of how emotions, stress, and social pressure influence behavior. Awareness of the full spectrum of human communication, the words and what lives beneath them. When you develop this awareness, conversations start to feel different. You begin noticing signals that previously went unseen. You begin understanding dynamics that previously felt confusing. You begin seeing the hidden architecture of every interaction. And perhaps most importantly, you begin understanding yourself. The moments when you hesitate, the moments when your voice tightens, the moments when you add extra details to make your story more convincing, the moments when you become defensive because a question hit too close. These self-observations aren't reasons for shame. They're invitations to understand your own fears, your own insecurities, your own need for protection. Because the human mind is incredibly complex. And the signals we reveal in conversation, our expressions, our tone, our body language, often communicate far more than our words alone. So the next time you find yourself in an important conversation, try observing more carefully. Listen not only to what is being said, but also to how it is being said. Watch the rhythm of the responses. Notice the emotional shifts that appear when certain questions arise. Pay attention to the patterns that emerge over time. You may begin to recognize dynamics that were invisible before. And with that awareness, conversations may start to feel very different. Not because you suddenly know every truth hidden beneath the surface, but because you now understand something deeper about human nature. The truth is rarely hidden in one dramatic moment. It usually reveals itself quietly, through the subtle patterns of human behavior. If this exploration of human psychology made you notice conversations in a completely new way, if you found yourself thinking about past conversations, past relationships, past moments where something felt slightly off, if you want to go deeper into the hidden architecture of human behavior, then I invite you to continue this journey. Because understanding deception is just the beginning. The real exploration lies in understanding what drives us, the fears, the desires, the hidden motivations that shape every interaction. Click the video you see on screen right now. It's the next step in understanding not just when people are lying, but why. And once you understand the why, the what becomes almost impossible to hide.